with that, I will turn it over to the two presenters that are going to be with us today, Clay Austin and Max Brooks from Southern Oregon University, yay, Oregon, previously of Portland State. So I'm looking forward to hearing about your work.
Oh, great. Well, thanks, neighbor Candace. Appreciate that. I am Clay, and I work at the Center for the Advancement of Teaching and Learning. It's our faculty development office on campus. And my co-presenter, Max Brooks, works in our Career Connections office. Just want to give a shout out to two of our other team members, Hood, who's an MBA student who helped us with a lot of research on this project, and Hart, who works in my office as an instructional designer. So they could not be here with us today, but they're with us here in spirit. I hope, like me, you all have enjoyed this amazing conference so far. It's been fantastic to hear from so many experienced and even expert users of ePortfolio and leaders of ePortfolio programs. And I will tell you, if you're looking for more of that, you've come to the wrong session. What we are some intrepid explorers. Max is going to give us the background in a minute, but we at SOU are just beginning to climb over the hill and see this vast horizon of ePortfolio. And we're making an attempt to understand what is happening in this space so we can find our path forward in it at SOU. So if you are a novice like us, I hope you'll appreciate hearing our story and our perspective. And if you are experienced, even an expert in the space, we definitely welcome you to be our Sherpa along this journey and give us your advice and tips. So I'm going to now let Max kind of tell you the story of how we got to this place of exploring the landscape of ePortfolio here at SOU.
Great. Thanks so much, Clay. And you can go ahead and click ahead there. So for those of you who have not had the pleasure of visiting beautiful Southern Oregon, we are located in Ashland, Oregon, which is just over the Northern California border. We are a public regional liberal arts institution here in Ashland, just shy of 5,000 students. Most of those are undergraduate students, though we do have a couple of graduate programs. Most of our students are here in class, though we also have growing online offerings. And this upcoming academic year, we will be celebrating our 150th anniversary as an institution. So that is a century and a half without any sort of institutional portfolio program in place, electronic or otherwise. And so we're trying to right that wrong now with our efforts. Yes, 150th last. Thank you, Andrew. Okay, Clay, go for it. So for those of you who were in one of the panel conversations earlier, you might have heard our colleague talk a little bit about kind of SOU's general education transformation process. And I know that we're here to talk about ePortfolios and not about GE, but I do think that it provides some context for our process, where we're starting from. And I think there are lessons to be learned about how it's shaping where we're going. So a number of years ago, the administration called together a group of faculty, staff, and students to begin thinking about reshaping or reimagining our general education curriculum. It was something that had not been done in some time. And when that group got together and started to talk, they set a number of goals for the campus. One was to reduce the gen ed credit burden for our students, particularly because it is higher here at SOU than it was at some of our peer institutions across the state. We wanted to ensure that there was kind of maximum transferability of GE credits, especially to make it easier for folks to transfer into SOU. We wanted to make the gen ed model more attractive to incoming students. And I know it might be naive in a sense, or at least aspirational, to think that gen ed can be the thing that persuades a student to enroll at a particular institution. But at the very least, we wanted to be sure that gen ed was a positive story we could be telling, and it was not a detriment to our kind of admissions efforts. And then my favorite goal here at the bottom is thinking about ways to make learning goals and requirements more transparent and purposeful for students. So as we talked to the students who were on this working group, this task force with us, as they talked to their peers, as we surveyed them, we heard again and again that folks didn't know what general education was. They didn't know why they had to take it. They didn't see how it connected to, in any meaningful ways, their majors, or their future career plans. Time and again, we heard that this is just a box to be checked, something to be kind of crossed off a list, a bucket to be filled. And we wanted to set about kind of creating, ideally, a program or a model that helped students understand why they were taking these classes. Okay. So that led us from kind of a disciplinary strand-based model to a kind of skills-based capacity model. And you can see the 6 capacities that we landed on there after much discussion and debate. If any of you have ever been through a process like this, reimagining your own gen ed curriculum, I empathize with you. I can appreciate the experience you've likely had. They were hard fought, but I think we all feel good about where we landed. And you can see here, EDI, communication and expression, inquiry and analysis, numerical literacy, creativity and innovation, and then purposeful learning. And it's that purposeful learning one, I think, that is most interesting from the perspective of this particular ePortfolio conversation, because in a lot of ways, it's kind of an Uber capacity, right? It is the capacity that helps students kind of see connections between and make meaning of the previous 5 capacities that you see there above it. And it's going to kind of best help them build that bridge, or kind of bridge the gap between the college experience they're having here at SOU and their broader kind of community, personal, and professional goals off campus. And we as an institution, I think institutions more broadly, have some experience, have good experience teaching communication and inquiry and analysis and numerical literacy and things like that. But we don't necessarily have as many tools in place to teach students how to make sense of those things, how to articulate them, and how to use them to move from where they are now to where they want to go. And all of you know that ePortfolios can be a fantastic way to do that. They can be a tool that helps people make sense of kind of what they're learning, what they're doing, set goals, and then make kind of concrete, positive, proactive steps towards those goals. Clay. So we knew that we had some faculty and some staff who made use of ePortfolios here on campus. They use them in individual classes, or there might be particular programs on campus that used ePortfolios, but we didn't use them in any kind of widespread, kind of institution-wide capacity. And so we figured, as we set about discussing the possibility of using ePortfolios, we probably needed to have some goals in place. The first question that folks generally would ask is, all right, well, what's the platform going to be, right? What is it going to look like? What are you going to use? Can everyone just use something different? Or are you going to have a specific platform? And if so, what's that platform going to be? So we knew we needed to think about that question. We also needed to think about a template, right? What was, regardless of the platform, what was the actual ePortfolio going to look like? How were we going to set it up so that folks could take this communal learning that they were doing as part of their general education and then tie that to their own individual goals, whether those are personal goals, community goals, career goals? How are we going to structure that for them? We needed to be thinking about a support system as well for students and faculty. So who is going to teach everyone to actually build these ePortfolios? Where is that knowledge going to come from? How are folks going to get trained up on that kind of thing? And who's going to maintain it? Right. We needed to think about a feedback system. So the ePortfolios don't have nearly as much meaning, of course, if you've got a bunch of people doing them and then they just sit there and no one's looking at them. So how are faculty, and in some cases staff, who are already stretched way too thin, going to have time or kind of make time to be giving meaningful feedback to students who were creating these ePortfolios? And then, of course, how were we going to assess what we were doing? How were we going to know that we were doing a good job and that all this effort was worth it and our students were actually learning the things that we were hoping that they were going to learn? So we knew we needed to answer these questions, and we were struggling a little bit to figure out, how do we go about doing that? Okay, Clay. Of course, the wisest thing we've probably done in this whole process is joining the AAC&U ePortfolio Institute and getting Tracy as our mentor. And as we were talking through these goals, these questions we had with her, she encouraged us to be looking both kind of inward and outward. So we need to be doing some internal research and some external research. So on the internal side, who was already doing this work here? Was it going to be supported? Was there an appetite for it on campus? Who were our allies? What were the concerns that people had? So we needed to begin gathering some of that information on our end, and we've kind of started that process. But she really encouraged us to be looking kind of outside of our own campus boundaries, and begin doing some of that external research. And so in that case, she was, encouraging us to think about, who are other institutions that it makes sense to compare ourselves to, that might have already established ePortfolio projects on their own campuses. What were the structures that they put in place to support those ePortfolios? How did they set them up so that it was both possible to create the ePortfolios in the first place and then keep them going, once they were established? Was there persuasive evidence that they were working, right? Has it been worth it for those institutions that are utilizing ePortfolios? And then, of course, we wanted to be aware of our kind of family over in IT, who already have a lot on their plates. How was it that folks were setting up and supporting these, technical systems that wasn't going to overburden a already overburdened IT team? So these were some of the questions that we had, and we're like, you know what? There's some experts out there, as Clay said, some folks are much further along in this exploratory process than we are. We're just starting our exploration. We wanted to turn to some of them, but we needed a structure to go about doing that, to begin that process. And so that's where I'll hand it over to Clay to take the baton.
Thanks, Max. So I'm just happy to celebrate my 25th year in the classroom. Yay, this is amazing. I'm a full-time administrator now, but I still get to teach 25 years. I started actually in a third grade classroom 25 years ago with a chalkboard, and when I got that first job, I came out of my education degree, I had with me a 3-ring binder full of clear plastic sheets. I had inserted my lesson plans, my philosophy of education, photographs of my student teaching, all kinds of things. It was called a portfolio, right? And that was, everybody in the School of Education graduated with that portfolio. We were expected to take it around and share it with our principals over that summer, so they get a sense of what kind of teacher that we were. It's been a long time ago now. I said 25 years ago. Honestly, I don't remember any principal really looking at it too much, but I still remember the portfolio itself, and I remember specific components that were in there and that I had taken the time to crystallize and document who I was as an educator, and it really anchored me through all the tumult of that first year especially, and then even the years following. And I continued in that analog mode of teaching. My first, I think, 12 years, I only taught in physical classrooms with students face-to-face, even though I taught from kindergarten all the way through university level during those first 12 years of my career. But then around 2008, 2009, I moved into an online teaching mode. And I haven't taught in a physical classroom since 2009. So it's been a straight conversion in my career. And I say that word because I've had to convert almost every one of my teaching practices from an analog mode to a digital mode, from assessment to engagement, whatever I call homework, communication. Everything has gone through this analog to digital converter. And even personally, my own portfolio has gone from that binder to LinkedIn. It's gone over to a Google site where I have a more in-depth personal portfolio for myself. And I say that because it's really analogous, I think, to where our university is, because our university is going through the same process of moving into these digital spaces and looking for ways to engage students in these digital means. And our university, as Max mentioned, is smaller, it's regional, it's also teaching focused. Our classes are smaller. And so all of our faculty are really interested in what I would call authentic assessment, that are looking at meaningful projects that connect to the world outside of the classroom, that connect to the students personally, more personally than a Scantron or a Blue Book like that I was educated with in the day. And so as a faculty, I think they're very receptive to these what are now called alternative modes of teaching and learning and assessing. However, one thing that I have never carried over, and we haven't as an institution, is a programmatic e-portfolio approach. That's something that we could all get behind in a singular way. So that's really a lot of what we as a group at SOU are trying to understand, is how do you take something that's so personalized, that is so authentic and real, and kind of programatize it, kind of institutionalize it in a way that can address something as big as Gen Ed, that can touch almost every student in the university in a meaningful way, that maybe could be used to inform us as an entire faculty of our goals of meeting the Gen Ed goals programmatically, when we're trying to measure things like critical thinking and purpose and creativity. We have a sense of how to do that in our individual disciplines and domains, perhaps, but to do it at this level, it was really this new land, as I mentioned before. And that was the focus of our effort when Max and I and Hart and Hood tried to look out at the horizon of other schools and see what was out there. So when we began to consult the literature, I stumbled, of course, this is a year and a half ago, onto the International Journal of the ePortfolio. I'm sure some of you have, copies in your inbox right now. But I started to read and I started to filter for who's doing this in Gen Ed. And I began to read about Clemson and Salt Lake City Community College and all of these schools that had been in this work for years or many years. And quickly, I began to be overwhelmed with the variety of dimensions that could take place at this programmatic institutional level. And so I proposed to our team that we look at this idea of a benchmarking matrix. Because when I came into the position at the Center for the Advancement of Teaching and Learning, which you see there on the slide, CATTLE, as it is affectionately called, we had done the same kind of process to see what were other teaching and learning centers that were similarly situated as us, how are they organizing their work programmatically so that we could see how we fit in with the group. And so we had crafted this matrix I'm going to share with you now, just at an overview level, so you can see how we were able to use this idea. Now, again, I want you to look at the details here, but what we were able to do is, in these columns here, identify 8 peer institutions, 4 other 4-year public schools in our state, and then 4 schools that are COPLAC, which is a public liberal arts college consortium of which SOU has been a member in the past, and it has a similar kind of size and mission. So we identified those schools as peer institutions. And then we identified these 2 large domains of the areas that these teaching and learning centers address, and then also the means, the ways that they engage the faculty. And we have also been able to consult best practice from a nationally recognized group of the ACE, the American Council on Education, that had done a beautiful white paper about teaching and learning centers and kind of said, this is what we recommend these kind of units do. We have highlighted those areas and means in blue. So we were then able to go out and search the web and visit these schools and make kind of a yes or no, what are people doing, and bring that into a single view. And when our small group, myself and the 2 instructional designers that we have on staff at SOU, we could then prioritize our efforts and understand how our areas of work and means of work were situated with best practices as defined by experts in the field, and also as compared to these peer institutions. So I was hopeful that we could take a similar kind of approach and apply it to the e-portfolio space. And so that's when Max and I and our team began to do just that. So based on that review of the literature that we began, we brainstormed over 30 different characteristics of an e-portfolio program at the programmatic level. And then with review from our other team members, able to whittle that down to these 21 different characteristics. And then we kind of sorted them into the 4 categories you see here. And we realized quickly that the kind of yes-no approach that we had taken before wasn't so applicable in this e-portfolio domain. But we wanted to, you see in the parentheses by every characteristic, to kind of begin to populate some kind of sample responses or answers. Our initial plan was to, as we did before, send ourselves, our whole team, to visit some peer institutions and gather the information ourselves. We were able to get 11 schools that were recommended by our mentor that were also doing ePortfolio programmatic work at the gen ed level to go and research. But we quickly found it was difficult for us to go out and find this information on our own. We found that some schools had very little information about their ePortfolio program that was accessible to the public. We found other schools that had reads, that had PDFs that were dozens of pages long or minutes, and that we couldn't even wade through. So what we decided to do was instead to take this list and break it into a survey. And our hope was to send this survey out to our ePortfolio identified peer institutions and get the responses back. So I'm going to do now, I'm going to show you the survey. I'm also going to give you a link to the survey in the chat if you would like to explore it yourself on your own initiative. Let me make this a little bigger if I can. Is that visible enough for everyone? That's pretty good. Okay, so I'm going to go through this not too quickly, not too slowly. After I show you the survey, I'm going to then share the results, and it'll also contain the survey questions and the survey prompts, and have a way for you on a Google Doc to provide feedback, comments, criticism, compliments, complaints, etc. So for now, we can just sit back and I'll kind of go through it in a quickly overview. But this first page are our institutional characteristics that we identified here: school type, school size, and structure. And then moving on to the program characteristics. We are interested in the maturity of the program. We were interested in the primary scope of the program, whether it was primarily gen ed or more incidentally gen ed. We were also interested in knowing at the required level, were they required only in a course by an instructor, or were they required for a major, or required for graduation, for example, at the institutional level. We were also curious if these ePortfolios were only at the lower division or they persisted throughout the 4 years. We were interested in information about managing transfer students. We became clear that a key distinction was about audience. And so we wanted to know, is there a primary audience for the ePortfolio, employer, instructor, etc.? We were also curious about what kinds of student work was required. Common assignments, signature assignments, or do students just choose? We were also interested in the idea of student agency. Where do students have a voice? At the policy level, at the process level, or at the product level? Then we wanted to have information regarding platform. Again, student choice, mandated. Is there one is supported with choice? What kind of platform is supported? We are interested in the idea of portability. Students can take it with them, so to speak. Then we wanted to know quite a bit about program administration and assessment. Who oversees the ePortfolio program? Dedicated unit, Center for Teaching and Learning, like I work in, IT, etc. Is there a place where you keep the information online? We were curious about the number of staff that were supporting these activities on the campus. And we're interested, of course, in the budget allocated for these activities on campus. For a formal assessment purpose, we were interested, does it happen only at the course level or at some higher level? And we were very interested in, of course, how are students and getting support? How do they learn about using ePortfolio in a class, outside of class, on their own? Who is doing that work? And faculty support. Who are supporting faculty? Dedicated staff, IT, etc. And we were broadly interested in the role IT would play in platform procurement, provisioning, training, budgeting, and planning. And then lastly, we just wanted to have an open-ended response for our ePortfolio survey. So we were able to send this survey to our 11 schools that were suggested by our mentor that had similar goals. And we asked them to complete that sometime between April and June of this year. And we had 6 of the 11 schools identified that did complete the survey. So we'd like now to share the results with you. And as the slide implies, source some meaning from you, our crowd, our devoted crowd. So we're going to share with you the results in a Google Doc, and we'll kind of look at them together and chat through them. We'd love to have you jump in to verbally, if you'd like, into the space as we discuss through them. We also encourage you to just go into the doc yourself. You're welcome to scroll down through anything. Let me share it with you now. There's our Google Doc. And you'll see we have this has all been table of contents for you. So you can skip around if you would like. But with your permission, we'll kind of scroll through and see the results here. And I think you'll see a theme is that, as one of our reviewers said, a small n of 6, but lots of variance. And we'd like to get your feedback on, of course, the questions we had and also the meaning of the results. Let me make this a little bit larger. Is that visible?
Yes, Clay,
Yeah.
thanks.
Yeah, sure. So look at this, Max. We have our question about where are students required to do e-portfolios, and look at the variance. We have only 6 schools, but 5 different responses that are happening here in regards to Gen Ed.
Yep.
And it's interesting, we saw some schools that had required it only as a graduation requirement, so to speak, at institutional level. It was never part of a class. It was never part of a major, but it was something they had to do to graduate. We saw that it's only happening in a class other places. And so we're just wondering, how do we, as Gen Ed, how does this happen for us? Because at the course level, it could be quite decentralized. But then at the major level, maybe it's not really reflecting Gen Ed. So we didn't see a lot of consistency here about the level of e-portfolios being required. Now, this one I thought was really quite interesting, because when we were discussing e-portfolios, one thing that kept on coming up, people had experience saying you have to decide who the audience is. You really should not ever say it's a blend of audiences, because once you say the e-portfolio is for anybody, it's for nobody. And we would hear things like, well, you know, if it's for learning, then it's really a matter of reflection. And students are going to have a certain perspective to where they put in the e-portfolio, if it's primarily for themselves or for their instructor. But if it's for an assessment of Gen Ed, that's a different audience. And if it's for an employer, that should a different audience. And no one e-portfolio could ever meet all those different needs. And yet, when we survey our peers, we see that the blend, again, was the primary mode. And we have a difficulty knowing how to use this information to go forward with our own work. Max, I know I'd like to hear your thoughts when you think about, as your position in the university as Career Connections. How did you think about this when you think about the difference between a learning portfolio and a career-centered portfolio?
Yeah, I was interested to see the, you know, and we'll see more of this as you scroll through the page, that there's so much variance from answer to answer, that there was almost this theme that came out of the results. And again, recognizing how small the sample size is here, but that there's kind of no one way to do an e-portfolio, right? That we imagine perhaps by collecting this information, there will be, you know, kind of overwhelming evidence that this is the one way to do it, the right way to do it. And yet from answer, you know, question to question, answer to answer, we saw all this variance until we get to, you know, to this particular question, as Clay said, which, you know, almost everyone seems to agree that really e-portfolios can serve a lot of different audiences. And I think, to your point, that I work in career services, helping students kind of think about, you know, preparing their materials for a professional audience. I think it makes sense that the people are going to say, you know what, this e-portfolio is for myself, it's for my learning, but I also hope to be able to use it for employers. Maybe I'm not structuring it so that I'm going to present it to employers in you know, exactly as it exists in the classroom, but the very process of going through the building of the e-portfolio, the construction of the e-portfolio, you know, identifying artifacts, writing reflections, is going to help me present myself more effectively to employers. So then it's about your own learning, but it's still being used as a tool for professional development. And so it's interesting looking at this, all the different ways that folks are going to be able to use this. And I certainly hope that as we develop things here at SOU, that'll be a big, you know, a thrust of our own program, is to help students understand, how can I take something that was built for the classroom, but use it in a way that still is meaningful for employers.
And the irony is not lost to me, Max, that this is the most we have the most consensus on this question, but the consensus is on variety.
Yeah.
Look at this one. Again, what kinds of student work? Just a variety here. That between it's a common thing, or students are on their own. or both? 5 more responses here. We have initiated a path of a signature assignment, at least to say that we're identifying some characteristics that we think are better for our instructors to think of when they think of what should be in an e-portfolio based on the research. And that is one that demonstrates competence, one that demonstrates student autonomy, one that demonstrates relationships to outside the class, right? So we're looking for those kind of characteristics in our signature assignments and helping faculty to think about those general, more personalizable aspects in their domain. As we say, the signature on the signature assignment is the students. So we want the e-portfolio assignment to be personalized.
And Clay, there's a question that popped up in the chat asking if these signature assignments follow the model from AAC&U. And I guess I don't know if we have an answer to that, or if that's something that the respondents themselves would have been. Yeah, I'm not sure how they were interpreting the definition of signature assignments.
Yeah. So not from our perspective. We didn't define it for them. We haven't defined it in that way, limited for ourselves. Platform choice. Here's more consensus here. One platform mandated for all students, which is interesting. We have also been advised of a dilemma with platform, and that if you mandate a platform, then that can be more beneficial to institutional assessment. So that way you can, as a director of assessment or someone in my position in teaching and learning, can go see the portfolios, for example, because they exist in something that you own and maintain. Whereas if you let 1,000 flowers bloom, then you say we have an e-portfolio program, but you're not able to identify where the e-portfolios are. And so there seems to be a tension between using the platform for assessment of institutional objectives versus using the platform for student learning and personalization. And it feels like it's difficult to resolve that tension. But at least here, from our respondents, we're seeing more a leaning toward mandating and supplying a platform. So speaking over to formal assessment, we have never had at SOU an assessment, a programmatized assessment of Gen Ed as a program. We have a first year experience that there is a programmatized assessment of that. We also have a senior writing that there is a programmatized assessment of that. And they do longitudinal work from that first year experience to the senior writing. But there's never been that Gen Ed assessment here. And we've seen here on our respondents, 6 different respondents and 6 different answers to at what level are e-portfolios assessed. Again, this was interesting for us. We're a very small institution. We have very limited resources in terms of administrative resources. So we're wondering who should run this program? Where should this live? And look at the variety of responses. Again, 6 different schools that were given to us as, all doing the same kind of work we're doing in Gen Ed, but yet look how different it is again. Every school has a different primary oversight unit. Number of staff. Now, I think it's interesting that we had a third that said none, but then we have a few other schools that have some amount of staff that are directly involved of supporting e-portfolio activities, whether it's for students or for staff. So this is quite interesting as well. I think that in our talk with our faculty, there has been an assumption that they would not be the ones to teach students how to learn or work in an e-portfolio. That there's an assumption that someone else would do that the faculty's job is to teach the discipline, teach their course, and now we're asking them in Gen Ed to align that course to a capacity. So, like, for example, critical thinking or communication or creativity. So there's been a pretty well accepted assumption that someone else would be teaching students how to do it. And I think it's a catch-22. As I talk to our people, if you have the faculty teaching students how to use ePortfolio, then they may feel imposed upon, another thing they have to do. Not only that, our faculty typically feel, well, if they're going to teach it, they must be an expert in it. And a lot of our faculty do not feel expert in technology. And yet, if you have another class or person or unit that is assigned to teach it, then the faculty will feel like, I don't have to worry about that. That's what their job is. So it seems like a catch-22 in terms of who should be educating and helping students do this. Is it going to be the faculty in the classroom or something outside the classroom? And either decision you make, there's going to be some mitigation of the difficulty of that. And you see the alternatives here: self-study, or perhaps workshops or consultations at a teaching and learning center or a tutoring center. 50-50. Supporting students. Related to training students, but we all know students come into difficulty. Is it technical difficulty or is it difficulty with assignments? We didn't differentiate here, and we see a variety of response. Either they're dedicated tutors or instructors. We didn't really see IT, help desk type of responses to this question. It seemed to be people that are more closely aligned to the teaching and learning aspects as opposed to the technological aspects of ePortfolio that are providing support. How about supporting faculty? Here we see staff in a dedicated unit or the Center of Teaching and Learning seem to be similar type of responses. And then you have some smaller responses for other types of user or support staff, but primarily people that are in an academic affairs type of unit seem to be the one that are supporting faculty as opposed to IT. Speaking of IT, what role does IT play in the program administration? What we have for extensive is procurement and provisioning, right? Very little else in terms of training, budgeting, or planning. Which is similar to how our IT operates on things like our LMS and other teaching and learning technologies that we use. There we go. So I definitely would encourage you to keep that document. If you have resources, articles, people we should talk to, other schools we should talk to, put them in our Google Sheet. We will be collecting those. This is a work in progress, as you can see. We're not really on the way of having a clear single point of view of what we're doing here that can guide and inform our practice. It may be that it's just the field does not have that. maybe that the field is not going to have that. I will be very curious to hear some of our more experienced users say, yes, this is a quest that will never come to a conclusion. E-portfolios are so unique in their use and deployment that there's not going to be a best practice at an institutional level, as much as there could perhaps be best practices at a individual course level that are being established.
And Clay, I want to say while you were presenting it, there was a lot of great contributions in the chat. I thank you all for that. I've actually already saved the chat so that I can add that to our own notes as we kind of move forward. Who knows, we might be, if we continue collecting this information going forward, we might be back with a larger N next year and it can share out even more. We certainly are happy to kind of share this survey template or the rubric template for if anyone's kind of in a similar position as us and getting started. For those of you who already have your programs in place, we absolutely would be appreciative of you taking a few minutes to complete the survey for your institution. We're always happy to get more data there. And then also, we've got 2 minutes left here, so I don't know how much of this we're able to do here. But if there are questions that you feel like we're missing, as you think about your own ePortfolio experience on your campus, you think about how you've implemented it, things that have gone well, things that haven't gone well, and you're like, you know what, that's something I really wish we'd known before we had started, our initiative. We'd love to hear about that too. And again, you've got access to the spreadsheet and can add stuff there. You can chime in now if we end up with time. But we're happy to add questions. We don't necessarily know where our blind spots are yet, and so we're grateful for your experience. Okay. Well, Clay, thank you for your role in presenting. Thank you all for being here. If there's no wrap-up questions, I think we're happy to stick around for the next minute or two, but we hope that you all enjoy the remainder of your day, and we will see you in additional sessions here tomorrow.
Thank you all so much.
Great. Thank you, friends.
Thank you so much for a great presentation.
Thank you, Candace. Appreciate it.
Thanks for grabbing that chat, Max. I appreciate that for sure.
Oh yeah, yep. Oh, there are a lot of great contributions here as well. Some good conversation happening in there. So
Good.
We'll look through that together and figure out what we want to, how it can benefit us.
Yes. All right. Thanks so much.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Thanks everyone. Have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Thanks.